Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to Chief Disruptor's Separating AI Hype from Reality webinar in partnership with Scott Logic. This webinar is our latest in our AI Business Impact series, which kicked off with an AI membership survey back in April. We also had the AI Friend and Foe panel discussion a few weeks ago in London, and a highly informative Maximizing a Business Impact from AI report that we produced to share with the insights with our members that was released earlier this week. My name's Emma, and I'm the founder and managing director of Chief Disruptor. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're the community for disruptive business and technology leaders. As many of you will know, our mission is to help our members to make sense of disruptive trends and technologies. And I think we can all agree that AI is both disruptive and transformative, and it's changing every industry in ways we can barely even imagine. But contrary to what one might think, the explosion of hype around new tools such as ChatGPT, AI is not actually new to business and technology leaders. In fact, many organizations have been experimenting, developing, and deploying AI in a variety of use cases for some time, from robotics to customer service platforms, predictive analytics to fraud management. Having said that, it is clear that generative AI and foundation models have moved the AI goalposts for organizations. Generative AI tools such as ChatGPT or Bard now remove the barriers to AI accessibility and democratization. In turn, we have seen a hyper-fueled scramble by leaders to get to grips with the impact to their organizations and to their industries, never mind fears around ethical and practical challenges. So it's time we separate the hype from reality. So let's get started. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Caroline Boyd, our Director of Research and Strategic Development, who's responsible with Gabriel and the rest of the team for developing the AI survey and report. Over to Caroline.
Good morning, everyone. So we are joined this morning for some lively discussions by a group of expert presenters who are representing a wide variety of industry perspectives and use cases. At the end of our chat, we have allowed 10 minutes for some Q&A, so please feel free to use the chat function throughout the session if you have a question you'd like to ask to any of our panelists. But first, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for today. We have Tran, who is Regional CIO and Head of IT at DP World. We have Dr. Ashley George, who is President of Tech for Good, and Oliver Cronk, who is Technology Director at Scott Logic. So to get us started, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves and to share with us all a brief introduction into the work that they're doing in the AI field. So Quay, I know that you're working on a 12 to 18 month AI development plan at DP World. Can you start just by sharing some insight into the work that you're doing with that and your use cases for AI at DP World?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Caroline. So a little more info on DP World. So we're a global trade enabler across the supply chain. So globally, we probably handle about 10% of the world's container cargo. In Europe and the UK, we're probably better known for sponsoring the Gulf, actually, rather than our core business. So from our perspective on the supply chain side of things and AI, obviously the disruption in recent times to the global supply chain has probably highlighted the importance of a well-functioning sort of digital-enabled global supply chain. And from our perspective, the strategic aim is to really transform the organization to become a global end-to-end logistics provider, integrating what we see as our physical assets. So our container terminals, our warehousing, our physical assets, together with our digital assets, which is all the digital products and services will overlay on top of that. So from a technology perspective, this gives us an opportunity to co-create supply chain solutions and also win new customers and new markets, penetrate new markets. So a major focus from a tech and digital perspective has been the accelerated delivery of technology-enabled digital products and services with AI empowering a lot of these products and services. We go into some of the areas that we've been working on. I think from our perspective, it's kind of understanding kind of where you're starting from and actually what problem you're really trying to solve. because as with any new tech solution or product and services, it seems like everything is possible, but it may not necessarily be, you know, the best thing to get working on for your organization. So we've looked at AI in various different aspects, from both operational, but also from a financial, non-financial perspective on the kind of projects and use cases we've been looking at. So it's been used for video safety, predictive analytics. A core part of our business is still physical. There's a lot of big machinery, a lot of automation and so forth. So it's about using AI to drive real-time sort of forensic AI analytics to improve safety at our port terminals related to person behavior. So unsafe events and so forth, what we classify as unsafe events, or what the system can classify as unsafe events, close to moving equipment or potentially equipment that will be moved and so forth. That's quite important for us to predict and see the kind of opportunities where we can optimize that, and it has made a material impact in LTI FR, which is lost time incident frequency rates on that aspect. There's other parts where we're looking at where we're using AI for predictive analytics for the next mode of transport for containers coming into our port terminals. So understanding where containers are most likely to go next optimizes our stacking plan in our yard. So obviously with a traditional yard, you have sort of probably up to about 7 containers high. If you know that the next a certain container is going to go next, you wouldn't stack it at the bottom, because obviously that requires another 12 moves to move 6 containers off. You take that container out, move the 6 containers back. There's things like that where it has sort of immediate impact and use case and benefit to the organization already.
Thank you, Quay. That's brilliant introduction and a huge number of use cases for you at DP World. Ashley, could I ask you to do a little introduction, please?
Sure, not a problem. So I'm Professor Ashley George, and first of all, I'm an old cynical chemist, but I'm a computational chemist. So I started my career in the late 80s. And what a computational chemist in the late 80s did was try to predict what was going to happen before the experiments happened on computers that could barely add 1 and 1 together. And interestingly, I did my first AI in the mid-90s. So being able to follow along from those very early conceptual days when we didn't have enough data, it was overtrained, we didn't have enough CPU, we didn't have enough algorithms, but what we were able to do, we were able to dream, because we weren't able to do what it is, but we could dream. And what's really interesting now is seeing how some of those dreams that were articulated in the early 90s, yes, before the internet, people dreamed of a world where algorithms, statistics, whether it be AI or just normal stats, would be able to predict before experiments could actually happen. So what's really interesting now is being able to see some of those dreams start to come to reality.
Thank you, Ashley. And moving over to Oliver, I mean, if you tell us a wee bit about your role and maybe also how you feel the reality of the AI that you see with your clients perhaps differs from some of the hype that we're seeing around AI at the moment.
Thanks, Caroline. So yeah, Oliver Cronk, Technology Director at Scott Logic, and we're a software and data consultancy based in the UK. So yes, we've been doing a number, like Emma was saying at the beginning, this stuff isn't new, and as Ashley has just been talking about, this stuff has sort of been dreamt about for decades. And for me, what's interesting is what people's aspirations are with this technology don't necessarily match up with the reality when you actually try and connect these things with existing systems and existing data, and try and do that repeatably. And so, yeah, for me, it's there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of buzz, and clearly this whole talk is about sort of separating the hype from the reality. And I think clearly there are some interesting new capabilities that the latest generations of machine learning models bring to the table, but we all still need to keep our sort of feet on the ground to understand where the limitations are, what they can and can't do, and that's where I think a reasonable amount of awareness it needs to be raised, because the technology companies are doing a great job of getting everyone excited, and I think our role at Scott Logic really is to help our clients and organizations we work with tread that sort of path between hype and actually what's pragmatic and what can you actually achieve with contemporary technologies, and perhaps planning for what's on the horizon as well.
So Ollie, just leading on from that, and just referencing that what you were saying about the amount of hype in the market, what do you think why is it that all of a sudden that everybody seems to want to know about AI? What do you think? How is it all coming to a head now?
I mean, it's kind of your classic hype cycle, right? And that this stuff has been quietly sort of developing. I mean, like OpenAI's GPT model has been around for several years. In fact, we've been using it on our blog and things for some time. What really has caught the public's imagination, and I mean not just technologists, but pretty much everyone, is the power of ChatGPT, and it's the democratization, I suppose, the accessibility of this technology. Whereas before you needed to perhaps know how to use an API, you needed to have some sort of development skills. There was a playground that you could access online, but it wasn't as accessible as a chatbot that has, a conversational style. I also think there's something in science fiction, isn't there, around the AI assistants. I mean, the latest incarnation of this is in the Marvel series with Jarvis, and we've had sort of things like Alexa and Google Assistants and so on, but they've been a bit limiting. You ask them an interesting question and they say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. I think what's got the public's excitement going here is it's blown people's socks off when they've asked it complex things, and it continues to do so, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, and we'll get into its limitations and its biases and its challenges. But what's been really impressive is, with a bit of thought about what you ask it for, the output it can create can be very impressive. So that's why I think, because it's captured not only the technologists' sort of imagination, it's captured pretty much everyone in the business world's imagination around, okay, this is where we are now. Is it with AI? What can we now do with our businesses and we're in our organizations?
Yeah, agreed. Ashley, do you want to jump in, or Quay, on this? Any thoughts as to what's driving this?
Not a problem. So I think, why now rather than why in the 90s? So I think if we think about now we've got the convergence of 4 of the big global megatrends. The first is the global megatrend of the ability to store data cheaply. Never had that before. It's always been expensive. It's always been on-prem. You've never been able to afford to get everything. Second is, most of these modern algorithms scale by n to the 3, n to the 4, where n is the number of variables. So going from just 2 or 3 nodes to millions of nodes, you're n to the 3, n to the 4 with the modern algorithms. So you need cheap CPU. We've never had cheap CPU before. So there's one there. So, and the final one is, you need people to feed it. Got to have data to feed it. And where, Oliver's said about ChatGPT, we've now got a society that has mobile phones and smartphones that feed it. Every time they're feeding it. So they're feeding. What's interesting now is, as they feed it, citizens feed things. Again, not only corporations, but citizens feed things. The data is cleaned up. It's not the raw munging rubbish that was there. Now your smartphone cleans up your text, cleans up everything that's stored. So again, there's the 4 megatrends that are coming together that are allowing some of the dreams that we had before to actually become a reality. You can actually mine this. And again, going back to the fact that citizens are now feeding things, you've got the Google change in their privacy that happened over the weekend. And if I encourage you to have a look at that, and take an interpretation of how you see that Google privacy notice changing there. So again, from my perspective, why now? Because we've got the 4 megatrends coming together.
Thank you for that. That's great context. Okay, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's mostly been said by Ashley and Oliver. I think, as with most technologies, new technologies that come to the fore, I think it's a lot of the times, it's for me, it's I think Ollie's mentioned already, it's more about accessibility, but more importantly, the user experience, along with the disruptive opportunities it brings. I think generative AI currently, I think that encapsulates both perfectly. And I think it's hence that's why it's providing the current mass level interest. I think because very quickly, very easily, and very quickly, you're able to do some very interesting things, and the opportunities for now for a lot of people seem boundless. I think they're running out of ideas of what to kind of ask it, if you see what I mean. And going back to Ashley's kind of 4 mega trends, I've got the 3 C's there. So -1. So I think it's why it's come to the fore now. Obviously, compute. I think cheap compute, mass compute, as Ashley said. Then there's connectivity. I think we're kind of all interconnected in some way, be it devices, data centers, whatever, and you know, empowering that is obviously cloud, which sort of allows us to all seamlessly work in the background. Obviously, that's my simplified, non-academic version of that, Ashley, so apologies for that. And I think the other interest is also about the numbers it brings, the potential, you know, societal, but also business opportunities it brings. I think according to Gartner, obviously they always have their numbers and so forth. I think they're predicting that generative AI will probably accelerate what they call the programmable economy. I think which they think is going to generate about, you know, they always come with huge numbers, right? And it always goes 10 years, right? But I think they talk about 160+ trillion in new business through to 2030, which is probably kind of quite difficult to comprehend right now. But if we just go locally back, say in Europe and in the UK, I think the boost to kind of the UK and the R&D and so forth is significant. Obviously, we have some of the best institutions in the world for AI in the UK, academic institutions. And I think according to Google, I think, you know, AI can probably save the average UK worker about, you know, 100 odd hours a year just on general admin work. And, you know, for teachers, GPs, think of the kind of annual manuals and so forth that get sent that you need to look up on, all that kind of information. That's a lot of number of hours for kind of the public sector and workers and so forth when you just add all that up. And going back to kind of why now, I think with, particularly in the last 12 months, I think with generative AI, I see that as almost like the iPhone moment of AI. So it's where kind of, it's just something you pick up with no instructions and you go. And that's kind of made it so accessible to people. And just think, you know, that was many years ago, the iPhone, and just think how much more it now gives you as a tool, a product, whatever it is. And probably, you know, a lot of people probably think, you know, that they find it difficult to comprehend how they lived life without it previously.
Yeah, properly transformational. Thank you for providing that context and that background. So I imagine for many of those who've joined us this morning, there's probably a stark difference between the reality of AI in their organizations and maybe hearing about some of the incredible use cases, or perhaps reading about some of the hype in the media. And some of our listeners may be thinking that unlocking value from AI is all well and good, but a lot of my team don't even know the difference between machine learning and AI, never mind what we mean by generative AI. So does the first part in any AI journey, should it start around that education and knowledge piece? I mean, can you expect to get ROI if key stakeholders and the team don't really understand what it is? So Quay, do you want to jump in on that first?
Yeah, I think we need to remember that AI is like digital, like blockchain before and all that kind of stuff. It's just a tool. It's kind of a means to an end. So you don't just digitize, become a digital organization, or transform just to transform. And likewise, you know, people just adopted blockchain at the time, just, you know, to have a tool, right? So obviously, so, you know, when you're looking at, you know, a new disruptive tool, I think it's kind of, you need to kind of be sure to define and articulate the reason why and how it's going to help your organizational strategy or the journey or the outcomes you want to achieve. I think, because I think if you just start, there's two parts to this. There's two parts to any kind of tool, right? There's, I think Ollie mentioned there with the kind of hype cycle. There's a part where you have the early adopters who are just, you know, trialing the product. There's probably no real use cases. You're just trialing the product. And that's where you'll always have those people in your organizations that, you know, at the forefront of trialing tools and so forth. But actually, to get that acceleration in across your whole organization, you really need, you know, a lot of the other parts of your organization that don't actually even understand what it could do to start using that as well and understanding it as well. So I think you kind of need that. If I say going back full circle, it really comes back to the people and the education and the knowledge on that. I think if we look at AI today in its most primitive form and to a certain extent, even to certain sophisticated levels, it's still mostly algorithms, and it's still mostly dependent on people, or it originates from people. And I think we still need to also remember that people have biases. I think one interesting thing is, if you type in grandmother in Google and just see what kind of images mostly appear, I think you'll understand the kind of the biases we're talking about. So I think it's about providing the environment and the tools to enable those on the journey to continuously learn and iterate on it. I think with AI, with any other tool, I think we've talked about, displacing roles, displacing people. I think it's getting that fear factor away from your organization first. I think it's really more about understanding, what is your organization about? Whether it's enabling, cargo to flow seamlessly around the world, whether it's actually, improving healthcare and so forth. Think about that. Don't think about it displacing a role or displacing something else. I think today, everything important today is about the human aspect. And I think even with AI, that will continue to do so, which is why, the thorough understanding and the education and so forth is so important from my perspective.
Thank you, Quay. Ollie, sorry, just moving on to my next question. Arguably, some of the hype around AI is causing more harm than good. I think maybe it can be confusing people. But Ashley, would you say sometimes hype can actually help in an organization in terms of maybe getting things done? Or
Definitely. I mean, we see the speed of adoption of new technology lumpy as you start to talk the enterprise. Typically, you've got that gap between actually happening outside and then your corporate IT department deciding to adopt it, and it's gone there. It's everything like that. But just to build on Kay and Oliver's comments, what we're seeing now is the ability in organizations to dream in case thing, what happens if we can move this thing to there? What happens if we can do that? And then suddenly we've now got algorithms and technology that allows that dream to stand a chance of becoming a reality. And that speed to execution of the dream, or it was just a stupid idea, goes quicker and quicker and quicker. And again, I think from organizational aspects, it's starting to have those series of thinking scenarios. What if we could do this? What would it mean to our business? And that isn't about then executing. That's about thinking, well, when this happens, because you know what? It's likely to happen. Those dreams are likely to happen. So give a real example. Let's go back to Oliver's comment on Hollywood and being in movies. Space Odyssey, 1968. Hal, open the bay doors, Hal. All the way back there, those were the dreams that were there. Now Hal has a chance of opening the bay doors. It's a bit later discussion about whether Hal should open the bay doors. How do you overwrite Hal? There's a whole other thing that has been discussed. So I think for corporations, the dreaming of laying it out and documenting that, well, what if we could do this? How would our business change? What if our competitors did this? What would we do? So it's now the speed to endpoint, which has always been a challenge in enterprises. Dreaming's easy. No fairies at the bottom of the garden. You have to execute on them. That's where it gets hard.
I love it, Ashley. And Ollie, I can see you nodding away there.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
go on, Ollie. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think this is what we're really excited about at the moment, and I think the organisations that are able to think differently and think a little bit further ahead, and that's what I'm encouraging with my clients, is don't get too caught up with what people are getting excited about now. Think a few steps ahead about what this might mean to how you improve the productivity of your people, or how you might reimagine customer experience, or how you might personalize services. That's why I was violently nodding on with Ashley, because I think that's the key right now, is for people to kind of, I think there's a space to be creative and think with an open mind about where you might want to take your organization, but do so in a way that works for your people as well as your efficiency. I think that's the trick, I think, is and that unlocks hopefully hearts and minds, because I think as others have said already, there is a danger that people switch off because they go, oh, is this thing just going to displace me? And I actually think it's not about that at all. It's about augmenting people, and what that looks like in the near and medium term that's really exciting.
So when we hosted our AI ethics panel last week, the week before last actually, and we asked our panelists to leave our guests with one final key takeaway. And one of our panelists responded, you need to have an AI strategy. So I'd like to look at that for a second. So Quaid, do you have an AI strategy specifically at DP World? And does this encompass next generational AI as well?
Yeah, I think when you talk about strategy and kind of AI strategy or digital strategy and so forth, I think ultimately it's an organizational strategy underpinned by, what AI can do in elements of it or all of it. So it's understanding that and how that fits into the wider whole, because obviously you have an AI strategy of how you're going to use AI, but actually how does it actually contribute to what your organization is trying to achieve? That's actually more important. So for me, it's actually, firstly, before you embark on something like that, is understanding actually truly what your organizational strategy is. You'll be quite surprised how many people know the organization's vision and strategy for the most part. And actually then looking at it as a capability to enable that strategy to be delivered. And then the AI itself will be a roadmap, a strategy on how you deliver and use iterative versions of that technology before, so, do you start from, machine learning where you have masses of data and just trying to look at meaningful results first, before then you look at things like predictive analytics to look at predicting kind of, as I said earlier, what we're doing, which is kind of predicting the next mode of transport or certain kind of health and safety issues that may appear. And then obviously then obviously the further part is obviously then prescriptive analytics, and then how you use, AI then to actually impact and affect certain things going forwards. So for me, it's important to have a strategy, but not just an AI strategy. That has to kind of dovetail or actually be wholly part of your digital change and your whole organization strategy in what it wants to achieve.
Thank you, Craig.
Go
on, jump in.
There, just to say that AI is nothing, it's just in isolation. So if we think about, let's go back to an analogy of a graphical equalizer, an amplifier. You have three things. You have an IoT device at the front. It's a microphone that does analog to digital conversion. You then have an amplifier, a graphical equalizer that you can change the sound and move everything like that. And then at the end, you have another IoT device that's digital to analog. That's called the loudspeaker. So as you start to assemble your, whether it be AI strategy, it isn't really just about that. You wouldn't have in the music industry or at home a graphical equalizer strategy. You'd have a full end-to-end IoT device. You'd have the microphone strategy, what type of microphone, where you're going to place it, how you're going to do that. But that simply is an analog to digital device. You then have your amp, aka machine learning, stats, doesn't really matter, in the middle. You then have your final IoT device, which is your loudspeaker. Where's the quality? Where's surround sound? Am I going to have 5.1 and everything like that? So again, I think organizations have to have that conceptually. And where it gets really interesting now is the cheapness and the ubiquitous nature of those end-to-end IoT devices that do translation from analog to digital or digital to analog become really where it can have massive impact. So again, I've been in robotics for many years. Robots now have wheels or wings. So those IoT devices are no longer static. They have the ability to move. So being able to transcend not an AI, but an IoT strategy, where your IoT is perhaps individuals, it can be robots, it can be sensors. That's, I think, where the bigger enterprises are heading.
Thank you, Ashley. So thinking about, going back to what we were talking about earlier on about use cases, and hopefully there's a wee slide up at the moment, or just about to come up, which should show one of the results from our recent survey, the AI survey that we did. And we know from it was the maximizing the impact of AI survey that the majority of respondents that we surveyed were at the stage of exploring use cases and building business cases for AI. Ollie, if I could ask you, what are some of the most compelling use cases for AI that you've come across? Maybe actually in your, not necessarily in the media, not necessarily the big ones, but the ones in your actual interactions with clients as well.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to limit this to just generative AI, because that's what's caught the public's attention right now. I think that one of the most compelling business cases I've seen recently, and I worked on, was around fraud detection. You know, the ability to take several years worth of audio recordings with customers and play that into a model that looked at how the words were spoken and what the words were, and create, you know, essentially clusters of concerning calls. You know, was one of the most compelling returns of it. It was multiple millions, because the way it was able to augment the team looking for fraud was really compelling. In terms of the things we're looking at more, you know, more right now, I think it's customer interaction and customer experience, the personalization element. And I would say with generative AI, the challenge you have is the providers themselves are offering this at a loss, right? They're not making any money from this right now, and how they recoup their return on investment will be interesting to see. And I do think we need to be a little bit careful that some of the technology vendors out there aren't going to do a bit of a bait and switch on everyone, as in get you very excited with free trials, free, you know, platforms, which actually become very expensive services once they move out of beta, out of testing sort of phase, because these things are really expensive to build and operate, and risky for the cloud providers to run and operate. So the concern I have about all this stuff at the moment is it's getting a lot of excitement, but the reality is the actual costs, and I'm not just talking financial here, I'm talking environmental as well. It's just the sort of thing that a lot of people aren't really speaking about. These things have a true price tag that right now isn't being reflected in the market. So I think ironically, we may get to a place where we start to question, is this technology actually more cost effective than a person? And actually the right balance between using people for their strengths and using technology for the right problems, you know, is going to be key. So, but to get back to your original question, I think it's the things that, particularly with generative AI, it's the things that engage, that are perhaps on the more creative side. This is I think the first time that technology has caught our imagination, because it is quite creative. Yes, there is the hallucination piece that we probably need to touch on at some point. But yeah, the fine line between what's a hallucination and what's something quite creative and novel and exciting is an interesting sort of divide. But for me, it's about unlocking perhaps parts of the custom segment that you couldn't access before because it wasn't financially viable to do so. I'll give you an example. So, you know, at the moment, most of the financial services firms offer tailored investment advice and financial advice to high net worth individuals. Well, now all of a sudden, potentially you can take some of that, you know, guidance and advice, and have to be careful, you know, quite how you frame that because of regulation, but you can potentially scale that offering down to people that aren't high net worth individuals, and you can potentially offer, you know, more accessible routes into investing in stocks and shares, you know, in ISAs and various other financial products, in a way that you just can't do with people because you have too many customers. It wouldn't be financially viable to offer that level of advice to customers. So there are some really interesting use cases there, but I do think we need to be careful to look at the true cost of this over the medium to long term, and not just go, oh well, this thing's free, I'm going to plug it into everything, because that's going to be an amazing return on investment. Well, these things are beta tests in many cases, and they will have a true price tag coming.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice, Ollie, and something to bear in mind. So I'm just thinking about where AI could have the greatest impact in your organization. Quay, I was wondering if you could share with us how you would go about evaluating, how should organizations go about evaluating where they think AI could have the greatest impact? Because I'm sure given that there are so many use cases, there's so many ways that it could be applied. So how do you go about that evaluation?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about understanding where you're starting from. A lot of times we go straight into something about almost baselining, understanding where we are already, both from a cultural perspective, a technology competency perspective. And then I said earlier, just understanding your own organization's vision and where it wants to go, what it can achieve. So, and then, looking at that, then it's understanding the problems you're trying to solve and whether that has an operational or financial or even a non-financial impact, be it sustainability or other elements, non-tangible, financial, tangible results. I think a lot of challenges we face are really about problem solving or as I call it, solutioning. And it's about being able to get to the absolute root of the problem, which I think AI will help us to get there much quicker. And then committing to the resolution or the solution, which I think AI can contribute to, or actually is sometimes a solution in itself. When you look at sort of use cases, a lot of times when we look at new technology, what we tend to find ourselves in is actually we look at new problems to solve with the new technology. So you're already using two unknown variables, right? But actually, when you take a step back, actually when you're looking at new technology or new opportunities, there's the part where I call I'll break it down into 3 elements where you can use it from an organizational impact perspective. Is there an opportunity here to optimize my current organization and its processes, be it how it's done manually, how, whether you have a ton of data that you don't know how to use effectively, other elements of that. How do I optimize how I currently run my organization today, or how I deliver my products today or services? And then the second part from my using something like AI is actually how do I extend that service? Either it's, go quickly to new markets, or, complement products or integrate with third parties to provide an extended product or service. And then the last part, which is where people always look to straight away with new technology, is the transformative part. Actually, how do I totally transform my organization with new technology? And a lot of times I think we're quite quick to jump the gun in going straight to the transformative part with the new technology. And there's kind of immediate value where you can provide to your organization already. And that gives a good test bed as well to actually prove the technology and your understanding of technology, and actually getting that culture of change in your organization with the technology as well. So I think the question I would say is actually ask yourself, how are you going to change your organization with AI? What do you think, you could do from the optimization perspective, from the extending your organization perspective, and then then latterly to the transformative perspective.
Great, a great summary. Ashley, anything you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, not a problem. So again, building on Code's comments, one of them was, AI might save you or save somebody, 100 hours a week or 100 hours a month or whatever. They're soft savings. So you need the culture for that, say, soft saving of 100 hours a period to actually be reinvested into company work, not having longer tea breaks and longer coffee breaks. So again, that goes back to that, just because you made an efficiency over here, you have to have the culture, the change management and everything associated in turning that efficiency, soft saving in enterprise terms, into actually more throughput for the organization. So again, look to do that cultural aspect, because again, that's where many enterprises will have soft savings, hard savings. It's that ability to turn those efficiency gains into real throughput per areas there, or more tea breaks, 4-day weeks, and everything like that.
Thank you, Ashley. So moving on, we should have another slide popping up, which is another of the results from our survey, AI impact survey that we did. So I think probably everybody here knows the reality, which is getting ROI from any technology investment is challenging at the best of times, isn't it? And I think that's probably particularly difficult when it comes to AI. And this morning, we really like to, with your help, guys, is to get to grips and try and understand why that might be the case. So one of the greatest challenges to AI success that we identified in our Maximising the Impact of AI survey was integrating with existing technologies and systems. Ollie, if I could come to you, why do you think that this is the case specifically, and what do you think organisations can do to improve this? And what I'm going to ask you another one as well, related to that. Is it actually preventing organisations from delivering AI at scale across the enterprise? So 3 things, Ollie.
Let me do a short answer on the last question, which is yes, and I'll perhaps come back to a bit more of why. I think this one gets me really excited. I spent many, for those who know me, I know there are a couple on the call that do. I spent many years as an architect, and I still do a lot of architecture work in things I do for clients. And this is the exciting challenge, I think, for the technologists and architects to unpick, because what we have now is many decades of technology transformation. Essentially, we had, I won't go back through the annals of time, but we have multiple layers now, and I like to describe these as almost like archaeological layers. So when you want to add a system, you almost, if you're not careful, have to do a bit of archaeology and go and see where is the data, what systems is that talking to, and so on and so forth. And so the challenge with a lot of these newer models is the scale they operate at and the way that they use data is fundamentally different to the way most organizations have structured their data and the scale at which they're operating. So an example of this is, if you look at one thing we didn't touch on at the beginning, is the irony of the fact that this thing is on the internet and leverages the internet as a thing to exist. It uses all the internet data, and crucially, one of the things it picks up on the internet is linked data. So it's also been called the semantic web back in the day. I don't think we're using that term as much at the moment, but essentially what we're leveraging is a lot of about under the waterline information that links data elements together. Now that happens at scale through things like schema.org. For the more technically savvy on the call, you can go and look at that. That is kind of a well-defined, agreed upon sort of structure that defines the web pages and things on the internet. Most organizations don't have the same level of data, even literacy, let alone structure and quality and kind of consideration. And what this really requires organizations to do is to think about a few things. One, it shines a light on the quality and lack of data strategy and data literacy, as I said earlier, lack of data ownership and governance, and all those sort of things that people just don't tend to value because that's just governance. Governance is boring and doesn't contribute to the bottom line. But it turns out these things are foundational. And if you want to personalize the experience for your customers, well, unsurprisingly, you're going to need near real-time access to not only customer profile information in a way that manages privacy and is secure, but you're also going to need to know what was the 3 most recent things they did with us. Did they try and take out a mortgage? Did they contact support about the product because it failed? You need those signals, and you need to better feed those in, because otherwise, if the customer is having to do all this basic stuff to sort of describe what their problem is and what they want to do, you've kind of missed the opportunity here. And this is where this as a standalone thing is a toy. Let's be honest here, right? It's something that will help people write documents faster and emails and things. But fundamentally, if you want to link this into customer environments, there's a whole host of challenges. And I put a blog out recently that talks about a lot of this. But the big one is going to be data, in terms of getting timely, secure, privacy and GDPR compliant access to customer information and product information, all these other things, because this is a fundamentally different platform than most organizations are operating on today. Their enterprise architectures, the solutions they have in their organization are built on more traditional technologies, and the ability to kind of connect and integrate is going to be one of the biggest barriers that we're going to need to overcome in order to really see this stuff succeed in a way that's meaningful rather than just like a toy shop.
Thank you, Ollie. I mean, when we think about scaling, we often think about cloud. So, Quay, I was going to ask you, do you think this challenge is greater depending on whether you're hosting on the cloud?
I think we need to remember that cloud is just the technology infrastructure or application platform. it enables us to host and deliver solutions across, be it IaaS or ultimately to SaaS and so forth on that. And obviously with cloud, interconnectivity is a prerequisite. So beyond your traditional data centers or partners or so forth. I think as Ollie rightly said, it's about access to data, more importantly, and validation and cleansing that data, regardless of whether you're in the cloud or on-premise. That's quite a big challenge with regards to AI. I think the challenge for a lot of organizations, particularly I would say non-cloud native organizations, is that their data is in a whole load of places, right? So you're probably in a hybrid scenario, part on-prem, part cloud, part on the endpoint even. So it's actually so it's not about, whether you're hosting the cloud or not, because you'll have a similar situation, even your AI platform is local, because actually it's where your data is, that's probably more important if you're using your data to generate that. Obviously, if you go in public AI and, ChatGPT, that's less of an issue because obviously you're just using what information is out there for now. Once you want to start using internal data, be it for machine learning and so forth, that's where you actually need to interconnect your data sources and so forth. And you can say that cloud is a challenge, but then again, cloud is an opportunity as well, because obviously with a lot of cloud platforms, interconnectivity is out of the box. You have a lot of open APIs and so forth that allow you to more easily, I wouldn't say it's simple, but more easily interconnect to those kind of data endpoints and so forth, where you need to use it. I think what's also important to understand is that regardless of whether you're hosting on the cloud or on-prem or hybrid, I think as Ollie said, good architecture is important, and understanding that all of a sudden I think a lot of people have learned this over the years. Just because it's on the cloud, it doesn't mean it's not your responsibility to have good architecture and how you platform things, and where the data residency is and all that kind of good stuff. And more importantly, I think even with things like cloud, probably the most common cloud platforms, as we know, are things like we take it for granted now using Office 365 or Gmail or so forth. Obviously, with that comes the benefits of mass adoption and ease of access and so forth. But the other part of that coin is obviously resilience, and actually having the actual control of that resilience. Because when Office 365 or Gmail goes down, it's down. There's not that much you can do to it. Obviously, with AI, hopefully, if you're not using it for certain, business critical or even life critical situations, that's probably less of a consideration, but obviously still a consideration. I think another element, regardless of whether you're hosting in the cloud or on-prem, is access, as I said earlier, but also cyber and security and understanding, because ultimately it's about connectivity, it's about data, it's about access, and understanding that. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Just because it's open means it's a good thing. You talk to the cyber person, open means a bad thing. So it's understanding all those mechanics of allowing accessibility versus protecting your organization and the data and the owners of the data as well, and what you're going to do with that. Because ultimately, with AI, you're transforming that data to some extent and doing something different with it. So understanding that as well. So I know I didn't really answer the question on hosting the cloud or not, but I think it gives you just got different aspects of, it's not just a cloud question. Yeah, so don't think of it as just a cloud question. Think of it as actually how am I using it, and actually how am I going to embrace it initially, but actually where do I move on going forwards, and have I put those considerations up front when I start that piece.
I've got a dimension just quickly to add to that, Caroline, if you don't mind. I think
for it.
One of the things about the public cloud services is the potential, and of course, yeah, if you're on cloud and you're using a cloud service, that's probably a more easier path. But the point I was going to make is the cloud hosted services are currently what people are talking about using. But that's not necessarily going to be the only option moving forward. We're already seeing open source models that you can potentially host yourself, and this is where traditionally everything has gone cloud recently. This might be one where people take a step back and go, do you know what, do I want a hyperscaler to have my intellectual property being fed into this very complex model, potentially learning the next layer on top of use cases that we're using this technology for? Because let's face it, that's the next layer of innovation will be, okay, all these people are using these augmented tools. How do we then use that next layer on top and automate that next layer on top? So some organizations' IP sits in that space. And so how comfortable are you giving that IP away to a technology company that may, as much as they may be saying we're not using your data, and you need to carefully check terms and conditions around the procurement sort of side of this, that for me is going to be a big fundamental decision that organizations are going to need to make. Are they comfortable using a cloud service where their IP and how their data is being used is not 100% transparent and clear, or actually would they rather take that risk away or minimize that risk by running this stuff themselves, which it bucks the trend a little bit around pushing everything to the cloud.
And again,
Thanks. So,
just to build on that comment, you've then got to layer on two non-functional technical aspects. First is data sovereignty. I work heavily in health and life sciences. And again, German patient data does not leave German soil. Again, so as you start to generate those, so if you think about, you know, rare disease, where you need a cohort across the planet to get enough bulk of those patients to contribute data sets to there, you can't just assemble the data sets and move it out of the country. You've got to know what the legal liability is of certain data sets leaving those geographies, not just, yeah, hey, I've done it. So again, technically and architecturally, it might be that instead of the data going to the algorithms need to go federated to the data. Again, begins to do that. A lot more complicated than what we've got at the moment. And then the final one is, as we're assembling data sets from around the world, we've got to go back in to see what terms and conditions those contributors of the data set signed up to originally. And again, that goes back to making sure the contracts that have been put in place both before and going forward allow us to use the data for the aspects it's looking for. Again, going back to Q's point, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, or legally you can do it. And again, so, you know, get in touch with your lawyers, get in touch with your security, get in touch with your privacy officers, make them your friends, because those are the ones that are going to help you navigate your legacy ability to do what the technology is supposedly going to do. Because the last thing you want to do is end up in court because you've done something you shouldn't do.
Yes, Ashley, thank you very much. Well said. So just to move on to touch on something that we came up a little bit earlier on, and when we were thinking about some of the barriers to getting ROI from AI or from successful AI implementation, data quality is obviously a time-old concern for organizations, but as we know is particularly critical with AI. We saw in the recent Maximizing the Business Impact of AI survey that data quality was rated the joint second highest barrier to successful AI implementation amongst members. And we know that data quality is essential for training accurate AI models. So I'm sure you weren't too surprised to see this come out of the survey. Ollie, what are the type of different factors that can impact on data quality? And what can everybody on our call today do to improve data quality? Huge question.
Yeah, probably a separate webinar, all of it, all on its own. So I think the big thing that a lot of organizations that I see overlook is just ownership, and you know what's also known as stewardship and sort of the governance, the stuff I was talking about earlier that isn't exciting, doesn't tend to get funding, but actually is really, really important. And so I think the big thing people can do is think about how is their data owned and looked after, because I think there's a tendency here that this stuff is magical and it will just solve all my problems. Actually, no, there is some hard graft to do, and it will be on the data. What's also interesting to consider, though, is can we use some of these technologies to help us with that challenge? And I don't mean create synthetic data, because there is some interesting stories going around at the moment that some of the human reinforcement learning that's happening is actually also being machine generated. And you've almost got the worm eating its own tail in a strange sort of fashion, if you will. What I mean here is actually people are busy. People forget that they created a data set or whatever many years ago. Why don't we look at AI to help make the process of data ownership and stewardship and governance easier? So I feel like there's some real opportunities there for almost data assistance or data governance assistance for organizations that will help employees flag, this data's aged, do you still need it? help us sort of manage that, because I feel like what we've got in most organizations, unfortunately, is just a data swamp, because people just don't have the time or understand the importance of actually, stewarding and looking after their data. It's often unclear who owns it. You get departmental silos. So I think, being really clear about who owns what data sets, what the responsibilities are there, and potentially looking at, clever ways of augmenting people that are looking after data sets in organizations to really kind of look after them. That for me feels like, given the increasing importance of organizational data, that those would be some suggestions that, for folks to explore.
Thank you, Ollie. Quay, with all the different types and formats of data that you're collecting and processing at DP World, and at such an enormous scale, can you share a wee bit about the data quality challenges you face at DP World, and the impact that can have on how you're able to deploy AI?
Yeah, so I think we said, growth AI is compute and data and lots of data, and obviously other people probably heard of the 5 V's of data, and obviously one of them is veracity, which is the assurance of quality or credibility of the data you've collected, as in kind of, do you trust the data you've collected? And I think the assumption also today is that our assumption is that all data is digital. In our industry, that may not necessarily be the case. We still have our good friend paper and other elements as well, and obviously data, even a digital format, it can come in, not just text, but as we know with GTP4 and so forth, which can help with that as well. Those things like, video, voice, all the other elements as well. So, the data are coming in different formats, and actually how do you amalgamate that to make that useful? I think the question also is, based on all the data you have, I think Polly talked about the data swamp. I mean, from my perspective, obviously, with all the data you have, are you sitting on a landmine, or are you sitting on a gold mine, or are you sitting on a landmine? Because what you do with that, based on what you have already, actually is a lot of work that you still need to do to make it usable. The assumption is that whatever data you have, you can put it in something and it will work, right? I think that's the assumption. And as with most tech, there's always a validation stage and a prep stage and so forth. That doesn't disappear with this. So sometimes we look, so you need to ask yourself, can you extract immediate tangible value from the data as is, or is there so much sort of bad data from the ecosystem right now that actually there's a lot of other work to be done to make it usable? And I think that's where having tools first to validate and verify your data and so forth is quite important. I think if we look at, say, an example would be, if we just used our machine learning algorithms on the last 3 years of supply chain data, that will look very different from the last 10 or 20 years, because as we know, a lot of stuff, we're not, hopefully, touch wood, not going to have another global pandemic in the next 5-10 years, whatever, right? So obviously that totally changed what supply chain data looks like in the last 3 years, coupled with all the other, what I would call sort of black swan events, like the Suez Canal blockage and all these other elements. Actually, if we're just taking that data from that last 3 years to forecast the next 3 years, that looked very differently. It's actually understanding, obviously having that understanding of what already with the data sets you have. I think also sometimes we collect a lot of data and the assumption is all data is useful, which it is to a certain extent, especially with ML and so forth. But understanding, from what I understand, one of the stats is like 97% of data collected in organization is unused once collected. Yeah, that's both an opportunity, but at the same time, that kind of tells you potentially how much noise there is as well in some of your data sets and so forth. So ironically, I think one of our use cases for AI or ML is actually to cleanse and normalize our data, simply because actually to do it manually is a significant burden. So that's one of the opportunities where we know, a vessel couldn't have birthed after it's left and things like that. So just when you're doing that on a global scale, tons of data, that's where kind of, tools and technologies can actually help. Before then, you actually use the technology, as I said earlier, that the technology can be helped to get to the root of the problem, but then the technology can also be the solution to the problem as well going forward.
Thank you, Quay. And Ashley, I'm sure you'll agree that data quality issues have an enormous impact on trust.
Yes, definitely. And I think as organizations start to think about that, one of the roles to play is to think about the British Post Office scandal. You know, started in the 90s, where a computer system detected possible discrepancies. Taken 20 odd years, and that wasn't AI, that was just a bog standard if then else algorithm. It's taken 20 years for that miscarriage of justice that impacted people's lives. There was suicide, there was a ton of things that the algorithm misrepresented, misdid. Going forward now, when miscarriages of justice happen again, and they will happen, how are we going to actually bring court cases such as the one that was 20 odd years old? How are we actually going to do those going forward? How are the people whose lives and the services that the AI is assembled? Again, remember that some AI is non-deterministic, which means that it is not going to give the same answer a second time. Whereas the Fujitsu system did give the same answer, so it was deterministic. So going forward, how are we going to protect the citizens who consume the services when miscarriages of justice potentially will happen again? So again, that's a big corporate risk that needs to be held at corporate level on the risk registers to begin to say, what are we going to do if this does happen?
Thank you, Ashley. I'd like to move on just as we start to get into the last section of our panel. I want to think about the impact of AI on the workplace, on people and ways of working. You know, and I think hopefully there'll be another wee slide coming up here. And if we think about exploring some of the business implications of AI risk, and ethics was one of the highest rated concerns regarding AI implementation in our recent Maximizing Business Impact of AI survey. And obviously one of the greatest ethical concerns about AI is the impact on jobs, and I think we've touched a little bit about that already. I'd like to think about what do you think, if we look at some of the other risks of AI, Ollie, how should organizations de-risk AI?
Again, this is a really long and complex one. I've done quite a lot of thinking about this. There's a bunch of technology challenges that potentially create barriers, and we've touched on some of them already, like integration and getting the right data and so on. But there's also a bunch on the business side around, you know, around the impact, kind of your value stream, your business model, impact on people and sort of staff engagements. You know, are people going to start to fear that their jobs will be displaced and engagement levels will drop? There is the regulatory challenges that we've touched on. I mean, Ashley was talking about potentially, you know, jurisdiction of data being a big one, but there's regulation, and you know, this is going to be very complex globally. If you're operating systems in a consumer space across the world, you're going to have multiple different sort of AI regulatory regimes that are already emerging. You know, the US, UK, and EU all looking different, and the EU looking starkly different, perhaps to the UK and the US. So, you know, there are your kind of classic governance, risk, and compliance type things to consider, but the big ones for me are, you know, the reputation and regulatory sort of side of this. You know, the newer models that are out now, and the ones that we'll see over the next few months will, to Ash's point about the non-deterministic element of this, there is a degree of mystery around some of this technology, and will it give you consistent, reliable results, or will it potentially spit out things that will get you in trouble? So the de-risking element for me comes back to the architecture. What are the pieces in the architecture you can put in place to counterbalance that non-deterministic element? It's very creative and is the source of a lot of the wonder and the excitement. But how do you kind of, you know, manage that risk in your organization by putting in place the kind of input filtering, the output filtering, the black box telemetry recorder equivalent of looking at how this thing is making decisions, and, you know, what flowed in and what flowed out, so that you can course correct in the future. So a bunch of things here. If anyone's interested in this, I'm happy to kind of take that one offline. And there's a blog that I put up touching on a lot of the architectural and risk sort of mitigation pieces recently.
Just before we move on, just a quick reminder to everybody on the group, thank you for your comments that you've been putting on the chat. And there have been some really lovely comments to the panel, so welcome panel. But don't forget to ask your questions via this chat, because I'm sure everything you've heard has generated lots of questions. So fire them across. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to ask, what we like to do at the end of our events often is just ask our experts to leave members with just one key takeaway that they can apply in their organization straight away, or just a tip. So we're going to do that, and while the guys are doing that, if you can come fire across your questions, that would be amazing. So Ashley, can I come to you first for your takeaway tip, please?
Sure, not a problem. My takeaway and my advice to all of you online would be, get your organization to dream. What if we could do this, or our competitors did this? What would we do? But don't just dream in the coffee room. Document those dreams. Make them part of your strategy. Live them not only at the C-suite, but also at the employee base. So that therefore, when your disruption comes, and it will come, your organization is prepared and is starting to think about what it will do. So you're building that momentum in change. So dream more.
Lovely, Ashley. Thank you so much. Ollie.
I love that one, but that's been taken. So that's Ashley's. I think for me, with my architecture hat on, it's think about how ready your architecture is, whether that's data, whether that's process, your cloud adoption, security, we've touched on as well. How is this going to impact your architecture, and what can you do now to bolster that? So is that the data pieces we've been talking about? Is that sort of beefing up your sort of governance and risk sort of side of things? So yeah, I think a lot of this is going to expose weaknesses in organizations' existing infrastructure and architecture. So thinking about where perhaps there are, legacy systems or other things that are going to need to be, basically, in other words, don't try and put a bespoke, ensuite bathroom on the top floor of a building that has several floors and a foundation that's crumbling, right? That's not a recipe for success. So there are going to be some hard decisions made about before we go full steam into building some amazing customer experience. Let's make sure our architectural fundamentals that will support that are going to scale. Otherwise, it's going to be quite embarrassing when it falls over.
Thank you, Ollie. And Quay, do you want to leave one last tip before we move into questions?
I've got lots of little micro points. Is that okay?
Yes.
I think it's important. I think we said it already, but don't underestimate the importance of data, both the biases of the publicly available data and the cleanliness of your own organization. I think the other thing is treat AI, I would say, as a new baby. So obviously it's going to require resources, time, training, and kind of boundaries of what you want to do with it and so forth. It's important to understand that you can't really impact what you don't understand. Yes, so try to get to that, both understanding where your organization is going to go, but also the technology and what it's capable of as well. And I think you really need to look in the mirror to see if you're ready for the change, the reskilling of the people, and that it's a journey, not a destination.
Certainly is. That's absolutely true. Thank you so much to the three of you. I'm going to jump into the questions here and put you guys on the spot. So first, I'm going to go to Julie, who said, we are building a new data center, and I'm conscious that AI processing is expensive. What considerations in the architecture should we be making to accommodate cost efficiency? I'm thinking that's you, Ollie, first and foremost.
So this is about building a new physical data center. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think the challenge is going to be how you kind of keep on top of the access to the GPUs. I mean, I think at the moment what's constraining people's ability to do their own AI training and deployment is access to things like the GPU, because it's very difficult. We had supply chain challenges off the back of COVID, and I think we're still seeing fluctuations in availability of some of these components. But I think if you aren't already at the stage where you've chosen location, I think you need to think about the sustainability of the location for the data center. These things are drawing huge amounts of power, need massive amounts of cooling. Some organizations are thinking about deploying those in regions where it's cooler, so not putting them in water stressed areas. But I think in general, I think a lot of people are kind of thinking cloud is the only answer, and the industry has sort of shifted in that way. So it's kind of refreshing to hear people thinking about their own data centers, because I honestly think one of the things this will bring about is people reviewing their cloud strategy, because I think the cost of these services is going to drive more workloads to private cloud and co-located. So I think continuing to think about your own data centers versus cloud is going to be key. And so there may well be increased growth in data centers versus perhaps what was originally envisaged, because my hypothesis is many organizations will choose to go private cloud or their own data center for this technology rather than hyperscaler cloud.
Lovely. I'm going to move on to another question. They're coming in thick and fast here. So we've got one from Pete, who says there's a lot of talk around ethics and liability with AI, with increased regulatory governance and noise from large content producers. Is there a risk the momentum of ChatGPT and other similar models ends in a legal battle over copyright? Ashley, is that one for you, do you think?
Oh, yes.
Oh, lovely.
Good. Linux Novell. Again, way back when in the open source challenge. Again, people will think that things have been done or used against what they signed up to do. It will happen. It is happening. It's just part of the total cost of ownership of owning and data mining data sets that you have that are legacy. Going forward, yes, you put in the correct terms and conditions, the correct privacy, the correct things like that. That's why we've seen all the major providers change their terms and conditions going forward. Now they're getting ready for this. Again, look at the Google ones over the weekend. They're getting ready for it. It's the ones that perhaps don't have that horsepower that are going, yeah, we've got this. Oh, it'll be all right.
Anybody else want to jump in with one last thought on that?
It's already happening. There's legal cases already out there. So I think that almost certainly that is something that we need to think about. And that there's been, for example, images generated with I think it was Getty or one of the major publication houses incorporated in the stuff that was being generated. So it was fairly slam dunk that they were using their imagery for training. So yeah, it's one of the many things that you're going to need to consider when you build these things into your your enterprise.
Thank you. Well, we're at 9:59, miraculously on time for change. So I just want to, I'm going to hand over to Emma, but I just want to say huge thanks to my amazing panel this morning, and thank you to Gabriel for setting that up. I'm going to hand you over to Emma to close, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Caroline, very much, and indeed to you and to all the Chief Disruptor team, as always. Without them, none of this happens. So thank you all to the Chief Disruptor team. This brings us to the end of our Separating AI Hype from Reality webinar. Really insightful and some really important points for us to take away.